This morning, the coronavirus has paralyzed politics. A member of Congress now sick with it. And if more get diagnosed, can lawmakers meet quorum and pass bills? We'll talk to a member of the Texas delegation. Coronavirus cases in Texas are up 300% since last Sunday. Dallas County with the most in the state. This morning, Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson in studio after he extended the city's state of emergency. STAR testing postponed in public schools. Democrats calling for Texans to vote by mail. And Governor Abbott ordered closed restaurants, bars, and gyms. We'll walk you through the political implications of the public health emergency.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
And good morning. Our program is going to look a little different this morning. We are practicing social distancing and keeping most of our guests in their own homes and out of our studios today. But let's start our program with some of the top political headlines we are watching. Governor Abbott finally did what so many county judges have already done across our state. Abbott decided to close schools, restaurants, bars, and gyms to prevent community spread of the coronavirus. This is in effect until at least April 3rd. The governor said he is going to cut back on traveling as well. Could the coronavirus, though, keep Texans from voting? Democrats now pushing for everyone to vote by mail in the May runoff election. Election administrators say it's going to require a huge effort to make an all mail-in ballot election actually happen. And Joe Biden has committed to selecting a woman as his running mate if he wins the Democratic nomination. Who could make the short list? A former rival? Or would he select someone to reflect the racial diversity of this country? Democrats have already started speculating. Since we saw you last weekend, the number of coronavirus cases in Texas has increased 300%. Everyone expected that to happen. Why? Well, it's simple. More tests were made available in the last 7 days. Right now, Dallas County has the most cases in the state, 55 of them as we put this program together. So we are beginning with Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson on the response here. Good morning to you, and we want to note we're a little farther apart than normal, 6-7 feet for that social distancing. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and it's always good to be here, even under these circumstances. It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming in. I want to start with a sentence you wrote in an op-ed a few days ago. This is an important sentence. It was a little farther down. I would maybe pull it up a little bit. Most cases of COVID-19, you wrote, are mild, but the life you save by taking precautions could be that of a loved one. Here's the biggest question I have, and the biggest question that a lot of people have. How long do you expect restrictions to potentially last? I've heard 8 weeks. Is that realistic?
The reality is we just don't know. This is so unprecedented. It's hard to emphasize enough just how different a global pandemic where we don't have the widespread testing to tell us exactly who is currently carrying this virus, how unprecedented that is. We can't really say how long we'll be in this phase of implementing these types of emergency regulations that you're seeing, because we really don't know the full scale of the spread of the virus right now. So it's just as much as people want that certainty, as much as I'd love to be able to provide them that certainty of when, I can just tell you this. We won't be in the circumstances we're in terms of regulations a day or a minute or an hour longer than we have to be. But for right now, without knowing where we are in terms of spread, in terms of community spread, we have to do what we have to do to keep people safe.
Mayor, is this working the way everyone anticipated it to work?
I don't know what people were anticipating because,
as far
again,
as leaders anticipated it to work.
What I mean by that is, again, the unprecedented nature of this. I think the governor has made the right decision in shifting some of this decision making up the chain to the state so that these regulations are more uniform, because what we're trying to achieve is flattening of the curve. And by flattening of the curve, what we mean by that is we don't want there to be a sharp run on our medical community, on our hospital system, because of a sharp uptick in the number of people who become infected with the virus. We want this to be spread out a little bit slower and over time so that our system can accommodate these cases. So I think that what we need then is a more widespread approach to these regulations. We can't have Dallas saying no restaurants except for takeout and delivery and no bars, and then Frisco or some other cities saying, we'll do whatever, the opposite of that. So
and the governor
this is necessary.
The governor has stepped in to make that declaration statewide. But let's talk about the economic impact here, Mayor. Thousands of Texans are getting laid off because of the restrictions. You were in the legislature. Do you think the governor should call a special session? Should the legislature consider rent relief or some way to delay mortgage payments? I don't know if they actually have the authority to do that, but something to help the people who are currently out of work.
Well, the legislature is the sovereign body of lawmaking in the state of Texas. They can certainly do what they'd like. They could meet in a special session. I don't know if I'd advise them meet in person. I don't know if they have the ability to meet through a video conference like we just tried in Dallas on Wednesday. But certainly some form of economic relief is going to have to come from every level of government that has the ability to provide it. And we can't forget something that's super, super important. The government's money is the people's money. It's tax money. The taxpayers gave it to the government. This is what it's for. So we're not doing anybody any favors. This isn't charity. This is us doing our job. And so the federal government, the state government, and local government all needs to step up to the plate to make sure that these regulations that we've put in place, which are necessary to protect public health, they're going to have an economic impact, and it's our job to cushion the blow on our citizens and our residents.
Let's talk about that for a moment. You guys are all over the public health emergency side of it, but the economic toll is likely going to be far worse, as you know, than the health toll of this. What kind of projections, if any, have you seen about the Dallas economy?
Well, I have not seen any concrete numbers put together yet because, again, my role in an emergency, which is what we are in right now, we are literally under a local state of emergency, is to lead the city's disaster response. And I can tell you I spend more time in the Situation Room at City Hall, in the Emergency Operations Center, and on the phone with White House staff, with state government staff, the governor's office, and with, of course, our county, which is our local health authority, talking about literally how to make sure that this doesn't cause an unnecessary loss of life. And I've created 2 committees of the city council to specifically deal with already starting the process of cushioning the blow economically. So we are doing what we can, but what that amounts to right now for me is a city council committee that's being chaired by Casey Thomas, the councilman, to focus on the economic impacts. And we have another committee that's focusing on the regulatory side of things and making sure that the regulations that we're putting in place are being followed, so this won't be a big waste.
Well, are there ideas that you're hearing from either of these 2 committees on how to cushion the blow to these citizens?
They haven't met yet.
Okay.
They are about to start meeting, but I definitely have heard from the private sector, and I think this is a great idea. We need to start figuring out places where we can shift affected industries like the service industry into less affected industry. So there are places that maybe have capacity to hire some of the folks who are being directly impacted. Finding them work.
I want to ask you a last question in the final moments here too. California and New York have now implemented essentially statewide lockdowns. Should Texas follow suit?
I mean, that's for the governor to decide based on, and this is what I would encourage the governor to do.
Do you think he should?
I think the governor should do what the public health authority that he has, he's listening to, Dr. Hellerstedt. I think he should listen to him, not pay attention to, because there are voices in all of our ears right now, the elected leaders. There are folks who are saying we're not doing enough and we're not acting boldly enough. And there are people who are saying we've acted too rashly and been over aggressive and are overreacting. I'm listening to public health officials every time I make a decision, and I would encourage him to do the same thing.
All right, Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson, stay healthy, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. You do the same.
Appreciate it. Now to a broader look at how the coronavirus has paralyzed our politics. A member of Congress from Florida is recovering from the virus right now. It's unclear if the U.S. House of Representatives can physically return to Washington. The bigger question may be, will the House and Senate be able to meet quorum if more lawmakers get sick? They need quorum to actually pass emergency relief. Abby Livingston is the Washington bureau chief for the Texas Tribune. She's usually at our studio in suburban D.C., but this morning she is Skyping in from home to reduce interactions with people. Abby, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Put this in context for us. Millions of Texans are looking for relief. What kind of contingency is there for Congress to actually meet and pass legislation if they cannot get to Capitol Hill?
Well, that is an open question. I mean, this is stuff that could be challenged down the road legally in the courts. But there's option one that so to backtrack, currently the Senate is in Washington in meeting. And when they vote in heats of about 10 people. So it's taking forever. The U.S. House went home last Saturday. And they've been at home in their districts. And some of them, I think they underestimated the scale of this, but I think they like being home with their constituents and having their ear on the ground. But when they come back to Washington, the entire process of getting to the Capitol is touching germs and bringing germs from their districts to each other and maybe going back. And so, there could be voting remotely, but my understanding is you need to have a rule change to do that, and you need to come and vote in a rule change. So we are in such uncharted territory, and leadership is very reluctant to do this. They don't want to set a precedent of voting remotely, but we are in unique times.
All right, Abby, thanks very much. Back to you in just a moment.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll speak to a member of Congress from Texas about this and ask what happens to education during this emergency, to testing, to advancing grades, even commencement ceremonies. And Texans brag about being a small government state, but considering the confusion, does that really work in a disaster? It's one of our topics on the Roundtable. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. We want to remind you about our political podcast. It's a chance for us to dive deeper into topics that we cannot always do on this program or in most newscasts. Our most recent episode takes a closer look at the economic impact of this health emergency. If you glanced at your 401k recently, this is one to download. Search for Y'all-itics or WFAA wherever you get your podcasts. And now to your phone, you can just aim this camera at your QR code, at the QR code on screen here. It's going to open a window on your phone and take you directly to the latest episode. While you're there, take a moment and subscribe to us as well. We are hearing from a lot of parents right now. With schools closed for at least 2 more weeks, what is going to happen with their child's education? With testing, with federal funds for attendance, even commencement ceremonies. So we asked Congressman Ron Wright to answer some of this morning. He is on the House Committee for Education and Labor. He is a Republican from Arlington here in North Texas, and Congressman Wright is with us from his home this morning. Good to see you, Congressman.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Appreciate you joining us from home. Headlines are saying that schools will likely be closed perhaps until August. How realistic do you think that projection is, considering where we are today?
I think it's hard to say because it's going to depend on the testing, which is really ramped up. Once we have some really good numbers nationally, then we'll have a better idea. But I think that's absolutely a possibility. And, I have my oldest granddaughter was supposed to graduate Mansfield High School this year, and she's not going to get a prom. She may not get a graduation ceremony. We don't know yet.
Wow.
So there's going to be a lot of very unhappy seniors. But it's necessary.
Yeah, and just to remind our viewers, we are on Skype because we want to make sure the Congressman and I practice social distancing, so we might have a few little hiccups there. Congressman, I want to ask you too, what do you think it's going to take physically to reopen schools? Is it 0 cases or maybe a peak in the number of cases?
Well, right now we're on our way up that mountain, and we're doing everything we can nationally. And I got to hand it to the American people; they have responded in a very positive way to the request from the president. But if we can flatten the top of that mountain, if we can flatten that curve, it's going to be over a lot more quickly. Once we're on the downside, and it took China 2 months to get there. Once we're on the downside, then we can make some predictions on how long it's going to last.
Let's go back through kind of what's going on now as far as education goes. No standardized test this school year, the president announced. They're waiving all interest on student loans, suspending student loan payments without penalty for 60 days, the president announced. Those are significant steps, Congressman Wright, but what else are your constituents saying that they need right now?
Everybody is afraid of losing their jobs, losing their income. We have this 3-phase approach that we've done in Congress. The first was the $8.3 billion. Mainly half of that was for diagnostic testing, investments in vaccines. The second phase, which the president and the Senate passed earlier, and we the president signed Wednesday. That is to help workers directly. We're now into phase 3, which the Senate is working on. The Republicans and Democrats are negotiating right now. They could be voting as early as this weekend on that, in which case they would take it up early next week. That's going to infuse a lot more money into this, up to $1 trillion. And it's going to be cash payments to people, up to $1,200 if you're a single adult making less than $75,000 a year, $150,000 a year if you're a couple, also $500 per child. So potentially a working couple with 2 children could get like $3,400 very quickly. They want to get that as quickly as possible. You're not going to have to file tax returns or pay taxes until July 15th. That's going to help a lot of people. We're also going to be helping affected industries like the airline industry with loans and loan guarantees, but also the interruption loans are going to be extremely important to small business. This is the bridge loans. There's like $300 billion worth of that to help them keep their payroll
and keep those
stay
people
in
employed.
business.
Let me ask you this, Congressman, the last few seconds here, too. A member of the House from Florida has the virus. You talked about, waiting to get the call to go back to D.C. to vote. How likely is that to happen?
Oh, I think it's very likely. We have discussed as a conference voting remotely. Yeah. And I think sometime in the future that may be a possibility. Right now it's not. We actually would have to go to Washington to vote to change to vote remotely, and that's not going to happen. All right. But we get this done, and we get it done as quickly as possible.
All right. Congressman Ron Wright, Republican from Arlington. Stay healthy, and thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. This virus is being fought at the local level. Every new public statement seems to spur more questions. In Dallas, local leaders answered many of those at a town hall, providing facts, not fear. Dr. John Carlo is a Dallas doctor who offered some important context about the coronavirus that we wanted to share with you this morning.
Infectious diseases have been with human beings since the beginning of our time, and we will continue to have them, but we win. We have ways to conquer this, and I believe we will do it, and we'll do it together.
That is just some of what Dr. Carlo had to say. The mayors of Fort Worth and Arlington also took our questions. You see on screen there, Mayor Betsy Price. The entire town hall, every question and answer is available on WFAA's YouTube page. Even in a health emergency, we still do see some politics at play. Democratic urban counties in Texas were quick to close public places. Republican counties were a day or two behind that. Why the difference? That's where we'll start next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Abby is back from her home in suburban D.C. Jason Wheeler is in for Bud Kennedy. Jason works at WFAA in Dallas. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, is here each week as well. Abby, let's start with you. It seems when this public health emergency started statewide here in Texas, the Democratic counties, the larger urban counties, seem to take action quicker to limit public activities and things like that. Suburban counties, rural counties were a day or two behind that. Why do you think the difference is?
I think this is part of the larger national rural urban divide. And I think when you're in a city where people live in apartments and pass each other on the street, there's much more of a chance of, or there's probably more political pressure on the local leaders to shut things down more quickly than in rural areas. But one thing to consider in the rural areas is you might not be as close to a hospital. So this should be taken seriously everywhere.
Did that surprise you at all, Jason?
No, I think too, you think about the constituencies of these leaders in these urban areas versus the rural ones. A recent NPR PBS Marist poll came out saying that 54% of Republicans think that the response to the coronavirus is overblown compared to just 20% of Democratic respondents. So maybe they're hearing from their own constituencies in these local areas too, Jace.
And Bernadine, that's fascinating, that poll is, because it seems like we have Republicans and Democrats both working together, both recognizing this is a situation that must be solved.
Well, I think the messaging hasn't caught up, because remember initially you had some in the Republican Party who was saying that this wasn't as serious. But I think now you're seeing that both parties, and I think the messaging will catch up, and that you're going to see a decline in the poll as to the number of people who think it isn't as serious.
Abby, there's something else I want to ask you about too, because in this entire phrase of questioning, Texas always brags about being a small government state, but does that really work in a disaster? It seems for the first week, the governor let the county judges and the mayors and the local municipalities make the decisions on this until he finally had to take charge and close restaurants and bars and things like that statewide.
And that's in line with our history going back to Reconstruction. It's always a bottom-up type of situation, but we're in a national emergency. And you can see governors in California and New York who are much more out on the front in liberal states and are more willing to jump on this, and as opposed to the Texas governor.
And Jason, she's right, because it does go back a long ways in Texas history. But does it work in a disaster? It doesn't, and I can say that unequivocally, because that's exactly what Governor Greg Abbott said in his news conference earlier in the week. And I have his words right here. He says, "The traditional model we have employed doesn't apply with an invisible disease like this." He says Texas has traditionally had more disaster declarations than any other state in the country, and we're so used to turning things over to those local officials who know the community the best. But he acknowledged in this news conference, when he did issue statewide orders earlier this week, that the model doesn't work for something like this. So Bernadine, is there something to be changed considering what we're going through right now?
Well, I think what happened in this situation, you had county commissioners, you had county judges, you had mayors who were complaining because there was no uniformity, because one county or one city was doing one thing, the other county, the other city was doing another thing, and then you had constituents and citizens crossing over those boundaries. That's what happened in this instance, is that you had the complaints that you go from one county to the other spreading the coronavirus.
Yeah, certainly a lot of complaints, a lot of confusion. Guys, thank you very much. We appreciate it, and thank you for watching as well. We'll see you next Sunday on Inside Texas Politics. Practice social distancing and be safe this week. Hope you have a good day.